We've introduced a bunch of new elements in this series on HTML tables. Of course, all the general properties and methods we've applied to other elements can also be applied to these. In this session, we introduce several properties and methods that are unique to specific table-related elements as we apply them to actual JavaScript code. In this series on HTML tables, we've introduced the following elements. Table defines an entire table. Caption, an optional title caption for a table. TR represents a row in a table. TH is a cell used as a header for a row or column. TD is a data cell used to hold actual content. Thead is one or more rows at the top of the table. Tbody is a way to section off blocks of data rows, or the entire set of data rows in a table. Tfoot is one or more rows at the bottom of a table. Col allows you to specify background color and/or border for one or more columns. Col group allows you to specify background color and/or border properties for multiple columns. And the properties and methods that apply to all elements also include these, of course. But there are some additional properties and methods that apply specifically to some of these. Most often, a table is built and served to the user from your website. Fixed, solid. But DOM methods allow us to be more creative and dynamic. For example, you could flag certain cells with content that meets some criteria. So change the font or color or background color. Or you could change the content with some flag or message text. You could run a search or test against all or some columns or rows. And you can dynamically add rows or columns. Now, many of these ideas require user input, what text to search for example, or what should be the contents of a new row, and so on. It's not hard to envision having some input boxes, buttons, or other controls to gather this information. We'll be using one of our previous inventory tables as a starting point to suggest a couple of ideas and explore developing scripts to implement them, just to provide some useful code examples, as well as to extend our range in JavaScript coding. So we'll highlight the contents of some cells, or add a column to a table dynamically. Now, reminder, here's the table we'll be working with. Our inventory file without the thead, tbody, and tfoot elements. It's the inventory.html file as found in your My Web Files directory. The heading row looks like this. It's a tr with 5 th elements, part number, item description, unit price, quantity on hand, and quantity on order. And a typical data row looks like this. So it's a tr element composed of 5 td elements. Class equals pno for part number, desc for description, num for unit price, and quantity on hand and quantity on order. So example 1, highlight the contents of some cells. In this example, we will look at the last 2 cells in each row. And if the quantity on hand is below the quantity on order, we will flag the quantity on order value by making the text red. Big picture of the logic. In each row, compare column 3 and column 4. Remember, column numbers in a row begin with 0. If the content of column 3 is less than the content of column 4, then change column 4's color attribute to red. So think about the mechanics. We want to process all rows in the table, except the first row, row 0, which contains the header fields. So we can use something like this. tnode equals document.getElementById parentheses inv table. Note, we will have to add id equals inv table for inventory table into the starter tag for our table. This gets the table element into a variable, and then all rows equals tnode.rows. Now note, rows is a property of table elements, So you get the table node into a variable, then extract the rows property, get an array of all the rows in the table. So now all rows has all the rows in the table. And then we do num rows equals all rows.length to obtain the number of rows in the table. Since all rows is an array, the length property tells you how many members the array has. In this case, how many rows are in the table. Now to step through all the rows then, we will use a construct like this. For I equals 1, I less than num rows, I plus plus. And then braces, which has the code to handle the current row. Note we start with the second row, row 1, and step through the array of rows, all rows, stopping when we've processed all the rows. Now we can find out all the cells, that is TD and TH elements in a row, by using the cells property. Cur row cells equals all rows bracket I dot cells. Cells is a property of a row node. It returns the array of all TH and TD elements in a row. Now, of all the cells in the current row we're processing, we want to see if the content of cell 3 is less than the content of cell 4. And if so, set the color in cell 4 to red. So here's our code. Our if statement says cur row cells 3 dot text content. So what's in the current row, cell number 3? If it's less than cur row cells 4 dot text content, if it's less than what's in the fourth cell, then cur row cells 4 style color equals red. And that's it. Except it doesn't work. What's happening here is that the text content of the different cells in many cases have different lengths, which influences the compare, because it's a character string compare, not a numeric compare. What we need to do is invoke the JavaScript number function to extract the numeric value of a character string, so we can do a numeric compare. So now our if statement is if number of cur row cells 3 dot text content is less than number of cur row cells 4 dot text content, then cur row cells 4 style dot color equals red. And that does work. So we put this into a function. Let's call it check inventory. And here's our code. Now, to run the function, we need to set up some mechanism for the user to invoke it. A button sounds simple and reasonable. So button, type equals button, on click equals check inventory, parent, click to check, and button. And there you have it. To summarize, to make this work, we add a script element containing the check inventory function, and in the body we add a button to invoke the function, and in the table start tag we have to add id equals inv table. And here's a very short video demonstrating this working. So here's our table as it displays in its page, and there's the button we added that will invoke check inventory. And when I go check that, you'll see in the right hand column most of the cells are red. There's one that's not, there's another, so it has caught items that are low in inventory. Example 2. Dynamically add a column. Suppose you wanted to add a column to our table with the cells containing the word low when we have low stock, or OK otherwise. We'll label the column header flag. And we can build on our existing function. First, we want to add a cell to row 0 for the header of the new column. New call header equals document.createElement parenthesis th. New call header.append child parenthesis document.createTextNode flag. So new call header is now a th element with a content of flag. All rows bracket 0 dot append child new call header. So that adds this new th cell to the end of the first row. Next, in our main loop, just after we get the cells for the current row into cur row cells, we want to insert a new cell at the end of the row. New cell equal all rows bracket I dot insert cell parenthesis -1. To insert a cell into a row, use the insert cell method. New cell equals rnode dot insert cell of index. Note, this creates a TD cell and places it in the row at the specified location. If index is -1, the cell is inserted at the end of the row. You may then wish to populate the cell, as demonstrated next. Then, in the if logic, if we find quantity on hand to be less than quantity on order, right after we set the style for quantity on order to be red, we populate the new cell with the text low. So, cur row cells bracket 4 dot style dot color equals red, new cell dot text content equals low. Next, we add an else part to that if, so that if the quantity on hand is not deemed low, we populate the new cell with the text OK. New cell dot text content equals OK. And this runs OK, except when you click on the button to check the inventory levels, the result looks like this. Which is OK, but I'd rather see the new column have borders in keeping with the style of the rest of the table. So I added a new style element for the new TD cells. TD.new, font weight bold, font size 10 point, border left none, border bottom, solid block 1 pixel, border top none. Border right, solid black 1 pixel, padding left 2 pixels, padding top 3 pixels, padding bottom 2 pixels, padding right 4 pixels. And then, right after inserting the new cell in each row, I set the style attribute to reflect this new class. So here's our new cell equals all rows bracket I dot insert cell -1, followed by all rows bracket I dot last child dot set attribute parenthesis class comma new. And now, after clicking on the button to check inventory, we see this. And I'm fine with this. So to put the code all together, we have the following. So here's our function, check inventory, and what's new is shown in red. So we add a header for the new column, and then for each row we add a new cell with the class of new, and then in this last column we populate it with the word low or OK. In this session, we introduced several DOM methods and properties as they relate to table elements and their descendants. Rows property of table elements returns all rows in a table into an array. The cells property of TR, that is row elements, returns all cells in a row into an array. And the insert cell method of TR, row elements, inserts a TD element at a specific location of a row. We demonstrated applying some of the newly introduced methods and properties in dynamically changing the content of one or more cells and dynamically adding a column to an existing table. And we introduced the JavaScript number function. Coming up, next we have a session that looks at an alternative way to change contents of cells in a table. This alternative way, based on an earlier iteration of this course, is not as elegant as the approach described here, but it leads us to explore some additional features of JavaScript that can be used in many additional applications. See you there.